I came home earlier than usual that evening, not because I planned to, but because the power went out at the office, and they sent us all home. It was one of those minor inconveniences that, at the time, seemed like nothing, just a lucky break in the middle of the work week. The house was quiet when I walked in, except for the faint hum of the washing machine in the laundry room. Emily wasn't in the living room, and I didn't hear the usual clatter of her cooking in the kitchen, but her car was in the driveway, so I knew she was home. I called out her name, expecting a casual, "Hey, you're home early," from somewhere in the house, but nothing came. The silence felt thick, unnatural. I walked toward the hallway, my footsteps heavy on the hardwood floor, and as I passed by our bedroom door, something stopped me dead in my tracks. It was locked. We never locked the bedroom door. There was no reason to. I reached for the knob again, jiggled it a little harder, and still, it didn't budge. I knocked. "Emily," I said, my voice steady but louder now. No answer. I knocked again, this time with the side of my fist, pressing my ear against the door. I heard something movement, a quick shuffle, then silence again. My stomach twisted. "Emily, open the door." A few seconds passed before I heard her voice, muffled through the wood. Just a second. Something about her tone sent an instant wave of nausea through me. It wasn't casual, not annoyed, not confused. It was cautious. Careful. Like she was buying time. I stepped back, taking a deep breath, trying to steady the rising panic in my chest. I looked down at my shoes, forcing myself to think logically. Maybe she was changing. Maybe she was on a phone call and didn't want to be disturbed. Maybe. The sound of a zipper. Not hers. It was too deep, too slow. My entire body went cold. I didn't think. I acted. My hand moved to the doorknob, my shoulder pressing against the wood. I felt the resistance for a split second before I shoved harder, the force rattling the frame. "Emily, open the damn door." "Wait. Just..." I didn't wait. I slammed my shoulder against it again, harder this time, and the lock snapped. The door flew open, hitting the wall with a loud bang, and there she was, Emily, standing next to the bed, wide-eyed, breathless, in nothing but a robe, clutching it shut like a shield. The room smelled different, not like her perfume, not like our house. And there, on the other side of the bed, was the unmistakable lump of someone else under the covers. Time slowed. I saw the way Emily's face drained of color, the way her mouth opened and closed like she wanted to say something but had no idea where to start. My eyes moved past her, to the pile of clothes on the floor, jeans, a shirt, and a pair of shoes I didn't recognize. The kind of shoes a man who wasn't me would wear. I didn't say anything. I just walked around the bed, each step heavy, deliberate. Emily let out a sharp breath, rushing toward me as if she could stop what was about to happen, her hands grabbing at my arm. "Danny, please." I yanked my arm away. The covers moved. A hand appeared, followed by a face that made my stomach drop even lower than I thought possible. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't some faceless nobody that I could unleash my rage on without hesitation. It was someone I knew. Someone I saw regularly. Someone who had been in my home, sitting across from me at dinners, laughing at jokes that suddenly felt like mockery. It was my best friend. I stood there, staring at the man I had known for over a decade, someone I had trusted, someone I had confided in, someone who had been there through the milestones of my life. He didn't say anything at first, just sat there, half covered by the blanket, frozen like a deer caught in headlights. The look on his face wasn't shame, it wasn't regret. It was fear, the kind of fear that comes when you know you've been caught and there's no way to talk your way out of it. Emily, on the other hand, moved quickly, stepping between us, her hand still gripping the robe as if it could somehow erase the reality of what was happening. "Danny, please, just let me explain," she said, her voice shaking, but I wasn't looking at her. My eyes stayed locked on him, on the pathetic way he avoided my gaze, how he suddenly seemed so much smaller than the man I thought I knew. This wasn't just some meaningless fling with a random stranger. This wasn't a mistake she could blame on too much wine or a lapse in judgment. This was calculated. This was betrayal in its purest form. "Get the hell out of my house," I said, my voice calm in a way that even surprised me, but it wasn't an invitation, it wasn't a request. It was a command. He hesitated, looked at Emily as if she was supposed to save him, but she said nothing, just stood there, silent, her mouth opening slightly before closing again, as if the right words had completely abandoned her. He started moving, reaching for his clothes, fumbling as he pulled on his jeans, struggling to get them over his legs fast enough, his hands shaking. I stepped back, not because I was afraid I'd hit him, but because the anger in me was building to a level I had never felt before. and if I didn't create some space between us, I wasn't sure what would happen next. As he grabbed his shirt, he finally spoke, his voice low, barely above a whisper. Danny, man, don't. I cut him off before he could finish whatever pathetic excuse he was about to spill from his mouth. Just get out. He nodded quickly, shoved his feet into his shoes without even tying them, and rushed past me, his head down like a coward. The front door slammed behind him, and then it was just the two of us, standing in the bedroom that only an hour ago I thought was still mine, in a house that suddenly felt foreign, in a marriage that had just disintegrated before my eyes. Emily still hadn't moved. She stood in the same spot, the robe now loose around her shoulders, her face pale, her lips slightly parted, like she was waiting for me to say something, waiting for me to make the next move, waiting for me to tell her what to do. How long? I asked, my voice steady, though my entire body felt like it was on fire. She swallowed, her throat moving in a slow, deliberate motion, her hands tightening around the fabric. Danny, I swear, it's not what you think, she started, but I shook my head. I asked how long, I repeated, this time sharper, leaving no room for anything but the truth. Her lips trembled, her eyes darting around the room as if the answer was somewhere in the walls, as if she could find a version of the truth that wouldn't completely destroy what little remained. A few months, she admitted, her voice so quiet I almost didn't hear it. A few months. Not a one-time thing, not a single moment of weakness. This had been ongoing, behind my back, right under my nose, while I had been waking up next to her, kissing her goodbye in the mornings, coming home from work expecting to find the woman I thought I knew waiting for me. Why? That was the only thing left to ask. The only thing I needed to know. She exhaled slowly, as if she had been preparing for this question, but still didn't have an answer that would make sense. I don't know, she said, and that was what finally broke me. You don't know, I repeated, a bitter laugh escaping my lips, the absurdity of her response hitting me harder than anything else. You don't know why you've been sleeping with my best friend behind my back for months? You don't know why you've been lying to me, sneaking around, pretending everything was fine. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't care. Not anymore. Not after what she had done. Danny, please, I never meant to hurt you, she said, stepping toward me, reaching out like she could still fix this. I stepped back. Don't, I said, shaking my head. You lost the right to touch me the second you decided to throw everything we built away. Her breath hitched, a single tear slipping down her cheek, but I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel sympathy. I felt nothing but disgust, betrayal, and the realization that the woman standing in front of me was no longer my wife. I turned around, walking toward the door, my mind already spinning with what I needed to do next. Where are you going? She asked, panic creeping into her voice. I paused in the doorway, gripping the frame so tightly my knuckles turned white. To figure out how to get you out of my life. And with that, I left her standing there, broken and alone, just like she had left me. I didn't go far, just out to my car, where I sat gripping the steering wheel so hard my hands ached. My mind was racing with everything that had just happened, every word, every expression on her face, every second I had stood there like an idiot while she scrambled for some excuse that didn't exist. I wanted to hit something, to scream, to tear apart the life I had been living because it wasn't real anymore. It was all fake. My marriage was a lie. The trust one thought I had with Emily was an illusion. The friend I considered family was nothing more than a disgusting traitor. I didn't know what to do first, whether I should call someone, whether I should go somewhere, whether I should go back inside and demand more answers. But I already had my answer. She cheated. Repeatedly. And she stood there like a coward, unable to even give me a real reason why. My phone was in my pocket, and for a second, I debated calling my brother. He'd know what to say, or at least he'd be someone I could yell to without feeling like I was losing my mind completely. But I didn't call him. I didn't call anyone. Instead, I turned the key in the ignition and backed out of the driveway. I needed space. I needed to be away from that house, away from the bedroom where she had done God knows what with him, away from the sight of her face that was now permanently burned into my mind, frozen in that expression of guilt and fear when I had forced the truth out of her. I drove without a destination, just going wherever the road took me, my thoughts loud in my head, looping over and over again through every moment in the last few months that I had ignored, every sign I had brushed off, every suspicious thing I had excused as paranoia. I wasn't stupid. I wasn't the kind of man who let things slide when something didn't feel right, but I had trusted her. I had trusted that if something was wrong, she would tell me. And instead, she had betrayed me in the worst possible way. It wasn't until I pulled into the parking lot of a gas station that I realized I had been driving for nearly an hour, the sky outside now completely dark. I hadn't even been paying attention to where I was going. I just needed to be anywhere but home. I got out of the car and leaned against it, breathing heavily, trying to push down the anger that was still simmering inside me. And then, like some kind of sick joke, my phone buzzed. I pulled it out and saw her name on the screen, but I didn't answer. A second later, another buzz, a text this time. "Danny, please come home. We need to talk." I let out a bitter laugh, staring at the message. Talk about what? About how she had been sneaking around with my best friend. About how she had lied to me every single day while pretending to be my wife. About how she had the audacity to stand in front of me and say she didn't even know why she did it. There was nothing left to say. The phone buzzed again. Another message. "I know you're angry, but please, just come back so we can figure this out. I love you." I felt my stomach turn. Love. That word meant nothing coming from her now. Love didn't make you lie. Love didn't make you destroy the life you built with someone. Love didn't make you sleep with another man and then try to pretend like you had no idea how it happened. I turned off my phone and shoved it back in my pocket, walking into the gas station and buying a pack of cigarettes, even though I hadn't smoked in years. I stood outside and lit one, taking a deep breath, trying to focus on the burn in my lungs instead of the fire in my chest. I didn't know how long I stood there, but eventually the cigarette burned down to nothing, and I flicked it onto the ground, crushing it under my shoe. I needed a plan. I couldn't just sit here all night avoiding reality. I had to figure out my next move. Divorce was obvious, but that wasn't enough. She had taken something from me, something I could never get back. Trust. Security. The life I thought I had. And she was just sitting there in that house, probably crying, probably trying to come up with some excuse that would make me reconsider, probably hoping that if she begged enough, I'd give her another chance. Not this time. I got back in my car and drove home, but not because I wanted to talk. Not because I wanted to hear whatever pathetic apology she had rehearsed in her head. I went back because I wanted to end this. I pulled into the driveway, turned off the engine, and sat there for a moment, watching the light in the living room, knowing she was inside waiting. I took a deep breath, got out, and walked to the front door, pushing it open without hesitation. She was standing in the middle of the room, her arms wrapped around herself like she was cold, her eyes red and swollen. "Danny," she said softly, taking a step toward me, but I held up a hand, stopping her in her tracks. "Don't," I said, my voice sharp, final. "I'm not here to listen to excuses. I'm not here to give you a chance to fix this. I just want to know one thing, and I want you to be honest with me for once." She nodded quickly, wiping at her eyes. "Anything. Was it just him?" She hesitated. "Just for a second. Just long enough for me to know the truth before she even opened her mouth." I felt the final thread of whatever was left inside me snap. The moment of hesitation in her eyes lasted less than a second, but it was enough. Enough for me to see the truth written all over her face. Enough for me to know that this wasn't just a mistake, wasn't just a single affair with my best friend. There was more. More lies, more betrayal, more nights where she had snuck around behind my back while pretending to be my wife. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay in control, forcing myself to keep standing there instead of doing what every muscle in my body was screaming for me to do, walk out and never look back. She opened her mouth, probably to say something, probably to spin some story that would downplay whatever the hell else she had done, but I wasn't interested in hearing her try to minimize it. I had given her a chance to be honest, and she had failed. "How many?" I asked, my voice low and steady, not because I was calm, but because I was holding on to the last bit of restraint I had left. She shook her head quickly, her eyes filling with panic. "Danny, please, it's not like that. I swear." I took a step forward, and she immediately took a step back, like she could sense the rage in me building with every second. "How many?" Tears streamed down her face, and for the first time, I realized they weren't just tears of regret. They were tears of fear. She knew this was it. She knew there was no way out of this now. I wasn't going to let her pretend anymore. "Two," she finally whispered, barely audible, like saying it out loud would somehow make it worse. I felt something inside me crack, something deep, something I didn't even know existed until this moment. "Two. Not just my best friend. There was another man. Another person she had betrayed me with. Another person who had been in my bed, in my house, in my life, without me ever knowing." I took a deep breath, trying to keep myself from completely losing control, trying to focus on the facts instead of the overwhelming anger flooding through me. "Who?" My voice was empty now, completely devoid of emotion, because what was the point in feeling anything for her anymore? She hesitated again, but she must have realized there was no point in lying anymore because she lowered her head and whispered, "Someone from work." I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head as the reality of the situation finally settled in. "Of course," I muttered. "Of course, it's someone from work." She wiped at her face, trying to compose herself, trying to make herself look like the victim, but I wasn't falling for it. "Not now, not ever again. I never wanted to hurt you," she sobbed, and that was the moment I felt whatever little patience I had left snap. I took another step forward, and this time, she didn't move back. She just stood there, like she knew there was nowhere left to go. "You never wanted to hurt me?" I repeated, my voice rising now, the anger I had been suppressing finally starting to slip through. "You had 2 affairs. 2. You didn't just make one mistake. You made a choice, over and over again, to lie to me, to betray me, to destroy everything we built. And now you want to stand there and say you never wanted to hurt me." She sobbed harder, covering her face with her hands like she couldn't bear to look at me, but I wasn't done. "You had every opportunity to stop," I continued, stepping even closer, forcing her to listen. "You could have ended it before it started. You could have told me the truth the first time you cheated, but you didn't. You kept going. You kept lying. And now, what? You want me to feel sorry for you? You want me to tell you it's okay? That we can fix this?" She dropped her hands and shook her head violently. "No, Danny, I know I messed up. I know I destroyed everything, but I still love you. I still owe. Love." I cut her off with a sharp, bitter laugh. "You don't get to use that word with me. You don't love me. You love the life I gave you, the security, the comfort, the fact that I trusted you enough to never question you. But love? No, you don't love me. Because if you did, you never would have done this." She opened her mouth again, but I was done listening. I walked past her, straight into the bedroom, straight to the closet where I grabbed the first bag I saw and started shoving clothes into it. I didn't care what I packed, didn't care if I forgot something. I just needed to be out of this house, away from her, away from the stench of betrayal that now clung to every part of my life. "Danny, please, don't leave," she cried from the doorway, but I ignored her, zipping up the bag and throwing it over my shoulder. I pushed past her without a word, heading for the front door, but she grabbed my arm, desperate now, her fingers digging into my skin. "Please, just stay and talk. Just let me explain. Let me." I turned so fast she flinched. "Explain what?" I snapped. "You already did enough explaining when you admitted it wasn't just one. That's all I needed to hear." Her grip loosened, and I yanked my arm free, stepping out the door and slamming it behind me. I walked straight to my car, threw my bag into the passenger seat, and got in, my hands gripping the steering wheel as I stared at the house I had called home for so many years. She was still standing in the doorway, crying, looking like she had just lost everything. But the reality was, she had thrown everything away with her own 2 hands. I started the engine and drove off, leaving her behind, leaving my marriage behind, leaving the man I had been behind. Because whoever I was before this moment, he was gone, and I wasn't sure who was left. I drove without a destination, the streetlights blurring past as I tried to process everything, but no amount of distance made it easier to breathe. My entire life had just collapsed in on itself in a matter of hours, and no matter how much I told myself I was done with her, that I was finished with the lies, the weight in my chest didn't ease. I could still hear her voice, still see the look on her face when I asked her how many, still feel the rage coursing through me every time I pictured my best friend in my bed, in my house, doing the things that only I should have been doing with my wife. No, not my wife. Not anymore. That word didn't belong to her now. She was just Emily. A liar, a cheater, someone I thought I knew but had never really known at all. I pulled into a motel parking lot, the kind of place where people went when they had nowhere else to go, and that was exactly where I was now. Nowhere. I checked in without thinking, barely paying attention as the woman behind the counter slid me a key and muttered something about checkout times. I took the key, walked to the room, and shut the door behind me, locking out the world, locking out the past 15 years of my life, locking out the reality that I had been reduced to this in a single night. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the cheap wallpaper, listening to the hum of the air conditioning unit, feeling the emptiness settle over me like a weight I wasn't sure I'd ever get rid of. My phone was still off, and I debated turning it on, but what was the point? I knew what would be waiting for me. Calls from Emily. Messages begging me to come back, to talk, to listen. Maybe even one from him, my so-called best friend, The man who had looked me in the eye for years while sneaking around with my wife behind my back. I clenched my fists, rage flaring inside me again, but I forced myself to breathe through it. I couldn't go back there. I couldn't confront him, no matter how much I wanted to put my hands around his throat and make him feel just a fraction of the pain he had caused me. No, revenge had to be smarter than that. It had to cut deeper. I turned my phone back on, and as expected, the notifications came flooding in. Missed calls, unread messages, all from her. But there was one that caught my eye, one that wasn't from Emily. It was from my lawyer. I had called him on the drive here, barely holding it together as I told him I needed to meet first thing in the morning. He had texted back a confirmation, told me he would clear his schedule. That was one thing I still had control over. The divorce papers would be drafted before the sun set tomorrow. I scrolled through Emily's messages, not because I cared what she had to say, but because I wanted to know how desperate she had become. Danny, please talk to me. I swear it was a mistake. I know I messed up, but we can fix this. Please don't do this. I laughed, a cold, humorless sound that barely sounded like me. A mistake. A mistake is something you do once, something you regret immediately, something that doesn't involve sneaking around for months, maybe years, with two different men. She didn't make a mistake. She made choices. Over and over again, she chose to betray me. And now she wanted to fix it? Now that she had been caught? Another message came through as I was reading the others. I'll do anything, Danny. Just tell me what I can do to make this right. I stared at the words, my fingers tightening around the phone. Anything. That was a dangerous offer for her to make, because right now, there was nothing I wanted more than to make her feel what I was feeling. And maybe I would. Maybe I would take her up on that, make her squirm, make her live in uncertainty just like I had been forced to, wondering if everything she thought she knew was about to come crashing down. I typed back the first response I had given her all night. You'll do anything? Good. Then start by waiting. I'll let you know what happens next. I hit send and tossed the phone onto the bed, watching the screen light up with another incoming call from her. I let it ring. She could wait. She could sit there in that house, in the bed she had defiled, and wonder what I was planning. I leaned back against the pillows, staring at the ceiling, my mind already working through everything I needed to do. Tomorrow, I would see my lawyer. Tomorrow, I would set the wheels in motion to erase her from my life, to take back everything she had taken from me. But before that, there was one more thing I needed to do. I needed to see him. Not to fight. Not to yell. But to make sure he knew exactly what was coming for him. I sat in my car outside his apartment complex, staring up at the second-floor balcony where I knew he lived. I wasn't sure what I expected to feel when I finally saw him, if the rage boiling inside me would explode the second I laid eyes on him, if I would lose control and do something I couldn't take back. But the longer I sat there, the more I realized that anger wasn't enough. Hitting him, breaking his nose, knocking him to the ground, none of that would erase what he had done. It wouldn't take away the months of betrayal, wouldn't undo the fact that every memory I had of my marriage was now tainted by the knowledge that I had been nothing but a fool. No, violence wasn't the answer. But that didn't mean I wasn't going to make him pay. I got out of the car and walked up the stairs, each step slow, measured, controlled. My hands were steady now, my breathing even, my mind focused. I knocked once, hard enough that I knew he'd hear it from wherever he was inside. There was a pause, and then the sound of footsteps before the door opened, and there he was, my best friend, the man who had been like a brother to me, standing there in sweatpants and a t-shirt, his hair messy like he had just rolled out of bed. His face instantly draining of color the second he saw me. Danny, he started, but I held up a hand, cutting him off before he could even attempt whatever pathetic excuse he had been preparing. You're going to listen, I said, my voice calm, steady, like I was just another guy having just another conversation. And then you're going to do exactly what I tell you to do. He swallowed hard, glancing behind him like he was debating slamming the door in my face, but he didn't. He knew better. He stepped aside, letting me in, closing the door behind us, standing there like he wasn't sure whether to sit, stand, or beg. I looked around his apartment, taking in the cheap furniture, the clutter, the way it looked like the home of a man who never planned on staying anywhere for too long. That should have been my first clue, all those years ago, that he was never someone who valued stability, never someone who respected boundaries. How long? I asked, turning back to face him, watching as he shifted uncomfortably under my stare. He licked his lips, hesitated, then finally muttered, a few months. I nodded slowly, letting the answer settle, pretending like it didn't make my hands itch to wrap around his throat. And the other guy? His eyes widened slightly, but he recovered quickly. What? I tilted my head, studying him, waiting for the moment it clicked. The other guy she was screwing. You didn't think you were the only one, did you? His expression twisted, something flickering across his face that almost looked like pain, but I didn't care. He had no right to feel betrayed. He had no right to act like he was the victim here. He was just another fool, just another man who thought he was special when really, he was nothing. I took a step closer, watching as he tensed, as his body instinctively reacted to my presence like he expected a punch that wasn't coming. I want you to understand something, I said, my voice still as calm as ever. I could ruin you. I could destroy whatever pathetic life you have. But I'm not going to waste my time on you. You're nothing to me now. You don't exist. He exhaled slowly, like he had been holding his breath, like he thought maybe he was going to get out of this unscathed. But you're going to disappear, I continued, taking another step forward, forcing him to look at me, forcing him to understand. You're going to leave. Quit your job, move, do whatever the hell you need to do, but you're not going to be in my city, in my life, anywhere near me ever again. If I see you, if I hear your name, if I find out you've been anywhere near Emily, I will make sure you regret it. His mouth opened, like he wanted to argue, like he wanted to fight back, but he didn't. He saw it in my face, the promise that I wasn't bluffing. He nodded, swallowing hard. Okay. I turned, walking back toward the door, not because I was done, but because I had said everything I needed to say. As I reached for the handle, I paused, glancing back at him one last time. Oh, and just so you know, she told me she loved me, too. His face crumpled, and I walked out without another word. The drive back to the motel was quiet, my mind finally starting to settle, the weight on my chest lifting just a little. The real work was still ahead, divorce, rebuilding, figuring out what the hell my life was supposed to look like now, but at least now, I had control. Emily could cry, could beg, could try to hold on, but it was over. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with them. I parked, walked back into my room, tossed my bag onto the bed, and pulled out my phone. One last message from her, unread. I love you. Please come home. I stared at it for a long moment before finally typing back. You had a home. You set it on fire. I hit send, turned off my phone, and lay back against the bed. Tomorrow, I would meet my lawyer. Tomorrow, I would start over. And tomorrow, for the first time in a long time, I would finally be free.